Oh, my brothers and only friends, it is I, your humble narrator Paul from Heavy Spoilers. Lots we do here in this big viddy, so come with me as we peruve A Clockwork Orange. The movie is one of the most controversial of all time, with it being banned in the UK for over 27 years. It was only in the wake of Kubrick's death that it was eventually re-released, but even now, it's still a controversial film. Throughout this video, we're going to break it all down and talk about why it's one of Kubrick's masterpieces. We'll also go over some of the real-life crimes it's said to have inspired and the massive controversy that it garnered in its release. If you enjoy it, then please hit the thumbs up and make sure you subscribe for videos like this every day. By the way, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into our breakdown of A Clockwork Orange. Now, like a lot of Kubrick's work, the movie's based on a book, with this pulling from the Anthony Burgess novel of the same name. Set in a dystopian future, this had a group of youths terrorizing society. The book was laid out into 21 chapters, with a character growing to the age 21. In the end, Alex was gonna turn his life around and finally mature and decide to mend his ways. However, in America, this final chapter was cut, with the publishers thinking it should have a more macabre ending. This was reinstated after 1986, but there was a long time where it had a darker final scene. That's something the movie carries as well, with it having Alex drafted in as a pawn in an election campaign. He imagines a crowd cheering him on, whilst he hints he's going back to his old devious ways. Turns out the government had reverted the process due to Alex being seen as suffering, and thus his freedom's now been restored. With this, of course, could usher in something dangerous, and I see that ending as being like letting the beast out of the cage. He's immoral, violent, and willing to commit heinous acts, with him being a clear reflection of society throughout. The movie also asks whether it's right for a government to intervene and change someone's free will to force them to fit in. There's lots of things going on beneath the surface, and I want to touch upon that said society first.
We were all feeling a bit shagged and fagged and fashed.
Now, both the novel and film feature Russian words, with the teenagers using a style of slang called nadsat. This comes from the Russian suffix of teen, and it helps to highlight the age of the characters. In real life, Burgess was also a linguist who put the slang together to hint to Russian culture. Because of this, it's thought the Orange world may be a failed communist or a socialist one, which is slowly turning to an authoritarian state. Alex's home's a municipal flat block, and the socialist artwork that appears in the film. Peruve also means cow in Russian, with this being the name of the milk bar. On the wall we can also catch the word moloko, which in itself also means milk. However, Kubrick kept the politics ambiguous because he said there's little difference in the two sides. He said he wanted Patrick McGee to play a lunatic lefty, whereas Anthony Sharp would be an authoritative right-winger. He said that both are similar in many ways, but they only really differ in their dogma. The writer sees Alex as a way of turning people against the government because they could potentially recruit these evil youths. Once they're drafted into things like the police, the pendulum will swing completely to the other side. We see this demonstrated in his friends George and Dim, who we later see have both become policemen. They end up reverting back to their old ways, but they're able to do it because they're now the authorities. So he wants to use Alex, as does the minister, and in both he's seen more as a pawn than a person. In the end, it is the minister who wins, as the writer gets banned from writing material that's critical of the government. This is another step towards totalitarianism, and Alex could represent the machine-like people that society could become. Society as a whole also wants Alex to be good, but they make sure it's not through his own choice. This in itself plays into the work's title, which also helps to basically sum up the whole film.
Why?
Well, I'll tell you why, and that's because Burgess stated Alex was an orange on the outside, with him being turned into something mechanical on the inside. Now, what he meant by that is that for all intents and purposes, Alex seems like a person, but the experiments almost turn him into a machine. We will talk about how this changes in the final scene, but it's a clear comment on obedience and also morality. Throughout the film, we see several people that wear orange who, in the end, are members of the system. They're people who've given up their liberty, and this is in order to fit into this controlled society. Huge shout outs to Still Daz on Reddit for spotting that detail, and it's a colour used to denote who's become subjugated. However, I think it's worth bearing in mind that morality can often be overlooked if the necessity for survival comes into play. For example, we all know the one about how most people would steal a loaf of bread in order to feed their family, and it shows that humans don't obey the law if their own needs outweigh it. The institutions in the film want to strip that all away so people won't commit crimes for their own needs. If they can break extreme hedonistic criminals like Alex, they'll be able to break others, and this is what I think the film explores. According to the wiki, Kubrick told a Saturday Review that behavioral psychology could be used as a weapon. If a totalitarian government got their hands on it, they could turn its citizens into little more than robots. You can imagine that this could evolve into slavery, and it's clear Kubrick thought it was a very dangerous thing. But the worst thing is that the therapy seems to work, with it changing Alex into one of their quote-unquote good people. In the end though, it must be reversed, because goodness is something that has to come from within. The need to do dark things still exists within him, which means that he hasn't really been cured. It's still there, he just can't act on it, so in the end this is never gonna cure him. Jared Bauer's done an amazing analysis on the film, and I think he summed it up perfectly with these lines.
Goodness comes from within. Goodness is chosen.
An exploration of the interplay between choice and morality, the film posits that stripping people of the capacity for evil doesn't cultivate moral beings so much as it erases humanity.
Jared pointed out the film in itself takes us through social conditioning and instead uses cinema to make us feel sympathetic. Let's be honest, Alex is a complete psychopath, but he still comes across as being a likable character. He's stylish, comedic, and really well dressed, so there's a certain allure that we have when we're watching him. Even when doing terrible things, he dances about, which adds to a certain level of seduction. Film is used as a way to hypnotize Alex, and it's one of the things he's shown to help change his ways. So you could argue Kubrick's doing the same thing, and using the medium as a way to seduce us. This could be seen in certain elements within the film and the classical music that accompanies the violence. Originally Malcolm McDowell was going to use a Cockney accent, but he used his real northern one to sound more chummy. Thus when he's acting violent it seems like a contradiction, as it's an accent we typically associate with being friendly. Really adds an almost juxtaposition to the work, as it makes him sound like he's friendly and educated. However, he's someone who just loves the depraved, and it adds a strange dichotomy to the work. Jared also brought up Plato's Republic and how he thought poets should be banned.
This is why Plato famously proposed that poets should be banned from his ideal republic. He feared that poetry could depict immoral behavior in such tantalizing ways that it could corrupt the minds of the young and perpetuate unethical acts. He recognized the aesthetic realm's profound ability to direct people's passions, so he mused that art should only be able to depict upstanding values.
To me, it makes me think art can be used to manipulate emotions, which is something we've seen in a lot of different lights. Several political parties have used the same song for campaigns, even if they in themselves possessed opposing views. On top of this, he added how technology stripped away the soul of art, and in many ways it leaves it feeling diminished. Jared said visiting Notre Dame makes you appreciate its magnificence because you're viewing it in the correct context. Now, even though a postcard can reproduce a photo of it, it's not something that can capture its soul. It's a great video, so I highly recommend you check it out, and I'll also link it below in the description. Now to me, elements like this show the mechanical reproduction of art can also be repurposed to fit a group's own ends. The 21st century ushered in an age of propaganda which was used to manipulate the public. All of this is made to make us feel a certain way, and thus when we feel, we also think a certain way. It's something that Hitler used to build his Third Reich, and allusions to this are seen throughout the film. There's a scene in which we can see Alex is wearing a red armband, and one of the guards has a moustache a bit like Hitler. The chaplain also throws his arms out like a salute, and on top of this we have a very noticeable cross. This can be spotted in the center of the cloth, and it highly resembles the one used by the Nazis. At 6:16, we also see another gang that wear Nazi uniforms, playing on this idea of violence within the government. It creates this world of totalitarianism, and for the next part of the video, I'm going to break down the whole movie. Now we begin with our humble friend and narrator Alex DeLarge staring intently at the camera. Stares is something Kubrick's used throughout his work, and it often helps to denote a character's insane. This is seen in Jack Torrance in The Shining, and also with Pyle in Full Metal Jacket. As we pull out, we also get a shot composition which Kubrick used repeatedly throughout his films. This is known as the one-point perspective, which gives a point on the horizon that all elements point towards. We've got some examples on screen right now, and it should give you an idea of how that framing works. In this movie, it helps to create a form of order in which there's no freedom for the characters to break out from. It keeps the shot tidy and almost vacant, with there being little that feels like it's out of line. This subliminally tells us that Alex must be forced to fit in, as he and his droogs are what breaks the composition. Here we can catch him sipping milk laced with drugs, which will stimulate him to get him ready for a night of violence. It's explained in the expanded text that the bar doesn't have a liquor license, and it serves milk laced with toxins as a way to get around it. Milk is also used as a way to conserve kids, and it kinda plays on the milk mornings that most children had in school. However, it's been perverted by the statues of women, which you can't even get milk from the breasts of. This to me plays upon the idea of it being motherly, but here's a subversion that's helped twist the youth. Here we have the juxtaposition of the symbolism of mother's milk, as that's supposed to be something that's seen as warm and nurturing. However, these statues are cold and emotionless, with them being clear objectifications. To me, it symbolizes two sides of humanity in which we seek to be both loved and cared for, along with being dominant. This dominance is shown to us in the very next scene when we can catch the Druids beating up a homeless man. He begs for the Druids to kill him, and gives his reasons as being because
it's a stinky world because there's no law and order anymore. It's a stinky world because it lets the young get onto the old, like you dog.
Now in nature, the young picking off the old is something that would be seen as an everyday occurrence. In his video on the film, YouTuber Moon brought up Thomas Hobbes and the ideas he put forth in his book Leviathan. He brought up how life's chaotic in nature, and this is demonstrated throughout the animal kingdom. Their life can be short, violent and filled with death, with a strong dominating the weak in every aspect of it. Humans sought to go away from this, and thus they craved order, which is when civilization was set up. In exchange for safety, they'd give up their freedom. However, it could also lead into some extremes. Those in power would turn people into machines who mindlessly follow order and carry out their bidding. Now I think in all cases this eventually leads to dissent, which we see demonstrated in the Druids. Initially they're content to fall in line with Alex, but it's when he strikes them down that they slowly start to rebel. They're not content with Alex's leadership, and they end up betraying him and leaving him for the police. Eventually I think all people rebel against oppression, with Alex being seen as a symbol of rebellion. Now this attack on a homeless man was also something said to inspire one in real life, with a 16-year-old boy who ended up killing a vagrant. When talking to the police, he said his friends had told him in the film, and even quoted a direct line from it. Now from here we cut to a derelict theatre house where we can catch a gang assaulting a woman. This again plays into the idea of art and violence, with both being aspects that exist within all of us. I feel like the whole thing with Alex is that removing the violent parts of him is also an affront to what it means to be human. The violence within the film is framed to classical music because it's meant to show the duality that exists within all of us. If we take away one aspect though, it stops us from being human, and thus it might also take away our ability to enjoy art. I feel like that's why classical pieces can be used to stimulate Alex early on, whereas in the end it's also used to torture him. If there's an aspect within us missing, as humans, it's something that can cause immense pain. Even though the violence has been stripped away, it means that Alex is operating as half a man. Now from this point we see as they race through the night and force everyone they pass to drive off the road. Doesn't matter if it's cars, motorbikes or vans, and this shows that they're the strong dominating the weak. This is further exemplified when they arrive at a home, helpfully labelled that, and they carry out one of the film's most infamous scenes. Tricking his way in, it's his technique of asking for help that he also later uses against the yoga woman. This empowers him here, whereas there it gets him caught, and it brings things full circle from this specific moment. It's also clearly not a coincidence that we get the bell ringing to Beethoven's Fifth. It's this classical piece that starts off the violence and illustrates the two aspects of man. The scene also has Alex singing in the Rain, which too was sung when a gang carried out a raid. Now this song is what gets Alex caught, as it's the homeowner who recognizes it when he hears him singing it in the bath.
Clouds chase everyone from the place.
At the stormy clouds chase everyone from the place.
Also notice how Alex hits twice on the beats, indicating that there's still his dark side within him. The use of this song also triggers the writer, and we see him regressing to an angry state. Whereas he once wanted to help Alex, he then solely seeks out revenge. To me, this is him going into a devolved state where he's also driven by impulse. This plays on the dark side within us too, being juxtaposed by something artistic. I think Alex doesn't fully understand his impulses, and in the end he's driven purely by pleasure. He's someone that we see in the movie easily picking up women, and therefore it's not like he's driven by sex in these moments. Therefore this scene in which he carries out this assault is driven more by the need to be violent. The scene originally wasn't scripted, and they spent 10 days filming it. The first actress quit due to the amount of takes Kubrick wanted, and you can kind of imagine what toll this would take. If you've ever been on holiday for a 10-nighter, then you'll know it's a long time, so imagine that, but having to refilm this over and over and over. She was then replaced by Adrienne Curry, who was way more comfortable with being naked for the shoot. Eventually, they ended up having to rework it and spent 4 more days just workshopping the scene. Kubrick asked McDowell if he could dance, and he started jiving away, muttering Singing in the Rain. McDowell said this was the only song he knew the words to, and thus when they filmed it, he sang it in the scene. Kubrick then bought the rights for $10,000, but it has to be said, Gene Kelly wasn't happy with him at all.
Why?
Apparently he met McDowell at a party a couple of years later, and Kelly ended up walking away in disgust. He's meant to be pretty upset with how his classic song was used, and the legacy that it now has attached to it. The scene's still a really difficult watch, and it provides the kind of violent images that would also repulse Alex. It's very much turning the audience against this type of behaviour, and in its own way, it's kind of its own experiment. Again, after the violence, we swap back to the art and see the Druigs going back to the milk bar. Here Alex catches a woman singing and stares intently, providing a balance before Alex lashes out. This is where his friends start to descend and turn upon Alex upon feeling betrayed. It's something we see throughout all aspects of society, and once the order imposed on someone damages them, they often end up speaking out against it. However, the Druigs don't mind when it's dealt out to others because their lack of empathy doesn't allow them to see it from their side. I think it's also important to bear in mind that the group only stand up when they're all annoyed by him. This demonstrates the power in numbers, and it's what revolutions are typically built on. Normally, the ruling class are small in numbers, with those down the totem pole vastly outmatching them. Shows how those below often overtake because they realise that they actually have the ability to reverse the power dynamics easily. We then see Alex return home. The housing estate is littered with bras hanging on the staircases, and it shows how sordid that society is now. Provocative artwork lines Alex's room, and we also see he has a drawer full of watches, jewellery and money. He shuts them away almost in a dismissive manner, like he doesn't really care for them, and I think this ties back to why he does it. Alex is more interested in the thrill rather than being bothered about the outcome of the crime. He also has a pet snake, which was brought in to make Alex seem more intimidating. However, on top of this, Kubrick discovered McDowell had a fear of snakes, and thus he brought it in order to scare the actor. It's one of the many phallic symbols in the movie, and unless you're blind, you're gonna see them throughout. Now, the most obvious of these is of course the long-nosed mask that Alex wears when carrying out his crimes. At the 18-minute 30 mark, we can also see Alex hangs the snake on a branch, and then this leans out and goes into where the woman's holding her legs open. When the music plays less than 10 seconds later, we cut to a closer shot of the poster and see how the branches swap sides. This is obviously done to impose the image further, and very obvious symbolism there that we're probably going to have to blur because YouTube's a bit of a joke.
I hate them.
Anyway, there's something that looks like a peanut. When they return to the milk bar, his cane has a round end on it, and the lollies that the girl held up at the record store, they all look dick-shaped.
Son of a bitch.
Alex also uses a dick-shaped piece of art to kill the yoga woman, and we get a subliminal image when Alex is in the bath. If you look at how the shower head is in the mirror, it lines up to appear like it's sticking out from his crotch. You watch this movie, you're gonna say dicks, and I feel like Stanley Kubrick, he's kinda like the kid from Superbad. The phallus is obviously power in this world, and its dominance is something that we see throughout the piece. Alex then listens to Beethoven, and it's at this point he fantasizes about people being killed. Intercut with this are shots of him with vampire teeth and blood dripping down from his fangs. Vampires are at the top of the food chain, and they feast off humans, as does Alex. They also get their means through violent ends, which Alex does too, and this is why I feel it's been chosen for these moments. The classical music is almost like a drug for him, with it making him see violence and death. He is dominant, and we see this echoed in his family structure, in which he's the one who tells his parents what to do. It's only once they get the lodger later, who could be stronger than Alex, that the power dynamics are finally reversed in the family. However, Alex isn't fully in control, as we see his creepy parole officer who too has dominance over him. He pulls his hair, slaps his knee, throws him about, and smashes him in the balls just like it's the like button. This action is mirrored at the police station later when Alex punches the officer the same way. The parole officer's even sicker and more twisted than Alex, but because he's given permission, he's not punished for it. When they catch Alex later on, he's also part of the beatings, and he even ends up spitting in his face.
You are now a murderer, little Alex. A murderer.
Laughing as he tells him he's a killer, it shows he doesn't care about the victim, and all he's bothered about is holding Alex under his control. He's a sadist just as much as Alex is, and we get some of the film's dark comedy when he drinks from the glass with false teeth in it. Either way, it's the ones who take power or the ones that are given it who, in the end, are the ones who have control. His parents are unable to control the situation, and I did wonder, seeing the purple hair and the bald dad, if they may have inspired Homer and Marge. There was a Clockwork Orange reference in The Simpsons as well. We can't show you because we're going to have to blur it, but shout out to our editor Matt for also pointing that out. Now, cutting to the record store, we get another nod to one of Kubrick's classics with the album for 2001 right at the front of the counter. This is sat next to John Fahey's album, which is titled The Transfiguration of Blind Joe's Death. On it's the song Bicycle Built for Two, Daisy Bell, which is what Hal sings when he's shutting down. One of the girls brings up the fictional artist Goggly Goggle, which is the name on the tape Alex removes from his player in order to put on Beethoven. Chatting up the girls, he then takes them to his room where we get a sped up sex scene that's still longer than the last one you had. Hey,
call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
Can't show it again because it's bloody YouTube, but according to McDowell on the commentary, this took 28 minutes to film and was done as one unbroken take. It was inspired by Funeral Parade of Roses, which Kubrick was apparently heavily influenced by. Going downstairs, he sees the gang waiting, and outside he ends up attacking them after they tell him the rules have changed. Georgie's now the general, and he's gonna be the leader.
Great success.
No more hurting each other, and it's all gonna be okay, well, for a bit. You see, Alex hears music coming from an open window, and this again makes him turn to violence.
For now it was lovely music that came to my aid. There was a window open with a stereo on, and I viddied right at once what to do.
Going to the bar, Alex buys him a drink to bury the hatchet, and I think it's interesting that we see the barmaid who looks like she's dressed just like his mother. This is even down to the wig, and I feel like this again highlights the position of dominance he's in as he's returned things to the status quo.
Now we're back to where we were. Yes?
Cut to the yoga woman's house, which is adorned with naked women on the wall, and again, that giant phallus sculpture.
Leave that alone, don't touch it! It's a very important work of art!
I also read a really interesting interpretation on Reddit by Human Beings 655321. They said this shows the hypersexualization of society and in many ways God's fall from grace. Whereas a lot of homes used to have religious iconography in them, this is steered towards centering around sex. Kubrick also thought society would get softer and that stuff that was viewed as hard back then would become commonplace in the future. Now, this highlights the differences in art as whereas for Alex this causes violence, for her it makes her at peace. However, power is what's truly important, and the scene being set to classical music highlights the two aspects of humanity. She picks up a gold bust to beat him with, and if we go back to just before she grabs it, we can see that this is Beethoven. I don't think that's an accident either, and with his music being used to trigger Alex, it's clearly symbolic. Now in the end, Alex is brutal so he wins, however, trying to use the same tactic he used on the first home is what gets him caught. The woman read about the story in the paper, and after hearing Alex using a similar technique, she ended up calling the police. As Alec hits her, we get a flash of the mouth of one of the paintings, which also has another mouth within it. It appears sexual, but also subverted, which highlights the direction that society's now gone. It's important to know that in the book she was also much weaker, whereas in the film she at least puts up a fight. This was done so the audience wouldn't lose complete sympathy for him, and Kubrick cut around her being harmed to spare us of the violence. Anyway, Alex is then arrested and sent to jail, and here we learn his full name is Alexander DeLarge.
Name? Alexander DeLarge.
McDowell made this up due to him referring to himself in the book as Alex DeLarge, but it turns out his real name's Burgess. This shows up in the newspapers that we get throughout the film, and it's also a reference to the film's author. Instantly, he's told to stay behind the line and put his items on the desk properly before being made to get naked. Alex has forced others to get naked in the past, and it's a true role reversal that shows how the dynamics have changed. This plays into the themes of sexuality, which we also get references to with the chaplain.
Is it going to be in and out of institutions like this? Though more in than out for most of you.
With in and out being something that Alex calls sex.
I didn't so much like the latter part of the book, which is more like all preachy talking than fighting in the old in-out.
No time for the old in-and-out, love. I've just come to read the meter.
Good.
Might be reaching, but religion and Alex's deviances are heavily linked, with him fantasizing about whipping Christ in the next scene. Religion is something that highly influenced Burgess, as he was raised as a strict Roman Catholic. He realized that in order to be a true Christian, one had to forgive, and it's possible that this story is almost autobiographical. During the war, his pregnant wife Lynn was sexually assaulted by 4 American deserters, which led to her losing their child. This could be something that influenced the beginning, and he too had to tackle having to deal with learning how to forgive. In the library, we see Alex's turn to religion, but he's clearly also using it to further his own fantasies. After the battle, he's fed grapes, and again it highlights how violence can be appreciated and worshipped if it's in a certain cause. I think there's this idea that there's a hypocrisy in society which we later see at the end in the hospital. We see a nurse and doctor who have been partial to a bit of the old in and out. They're playing against their baser instincts and breaking the rules, but look down on Alex for his own want for it. I think it's pointing out how murder and what Alex has been judged for also has a place in society as long as it's in a certain context. It's also here where he learns of the Ludovico technique, and he sees this as a get-out-of-jail-free card. At its most basic, it's like Pavlovian conditioning, which was set up to influence behavior. In case you don't know, Pavlov would ring a bell every time you fed a dog, and eventually the two things became interlinked. It got to the point that when Pavlov rang the bell, the dog would then salivate. This is similar to how the music's used, with it giving an unconscious response in Alex that makes him feel nauseous. Now, YouTuber Moon's done a big video talking about the links in reality with this, and in his breakdown he brought up MKUltra. This was an experiment carried out by the CIA to see if it was possible to influence behavior. Using drugs, they tried to mind control people in the hopes of creating assassins. Basically, yeah, Winter Soldier mate, but there's been lots of study on trigger words and creating agents who didn't know they were one. Control here is the key, which we also see lined out in the prison. We see the prisoners here all walking in a circle which resembles the Peace Prisoners Exercising by Vincent van Gogh. This was used on the cover of Discipline and Punishment, which is a book that lines up nicely with the film. Moon brought up the history behind this and also brought up a study on prisons themselves. The YouTuber discussed the idea of the panopticon, which is basically a circular prison. Lining the walls are all of the cells, and in the middle of this exists a guard tower. Now, Moon discussed how this affected behavior, and studies show that the people became more obedient. Though they're not all being watched, they feel like they could be, and thus it makes them much better behaved. Moon also brought up the idea of CCTV, and how that too kinda does the same thing. I have to admit, even if I don't see a camera, just that CCTV sign there, it makes you double think your actions. We feel like we're always being watched, and subconsciously it makes us act better than we would. The government even has something set up called the Nudge Unit, which is classed as a behavioral insight team. They reach across all aspects of society and try and influence people to think a certain way. For example, they tend to have characters in TV shows that recycle as part of their everyday life because it's said to get society normalized to doing this. I'll link Moon's full video just below as well, as it's a brilliant breakdown of the film that you should definitely go watch. Now, it's at this point that the minister arrives and also visits Alex's room. Picking up the Beethoven bust, this is an item that was there at his condemnation, but it also leads to him getting a second chance. I also wonder if Beethoven's name Ludwig helped to lead into Ludovico, as it is the Italian equivalent of that name. Should have stretched before that reach, but the minister ignores all the women on the wall. It tricks him into believing that Alex is the ideal candidate, and sums up they only see what they want to see if it's going to benefit their goals. Led to a hospital, we can see a sign at the reception that points out the cinema department, foreshadowing what's going to come in just a bit. In Alex's room, we see the serum as 114 in it, and Kubrick calls something CRM 114 in a lot of his films. Serum, CRM, you see what he's done there, but it was used as the radio equipment during Dr. Strangelove. Taken in, the cast here are actually real doctors because they had to make sure that this was safe for Malcolm. He did end up scratching one of his corneas though, which ended up leaving him temporarily blinded. Due to Kubrick doing so many takes, it ended up numbing his eyeballs, but it still looks like that this would really hurt. We then see a man being beaten up by people in white clothes who also wear dark hats just like the Druids. These characters appear throughout most of the scenes we see and clearly have been put there to resemble his group. The next day is shown footage of the Second World War captured by Germany, whilst Beethoven's Ninth plays away in the background. Hitler actually used this for some of his biggest speeches, with it being picked here for this specific reason. The song is meant to celebrate the height of human achievement, and it could also signal the ultimate achievement is to control others. This is then mirrored in the next scene where Alex is humiliated on stage and literally does some bootlicking. McDowell made sure they had a brand new shoe, and apparently it hadn't yet touched the floor. Either way, he's the ultimate symbol of submission and has now been bent into shape. However, it wasn't that easy, as McDowell's rib was accidentally broken. During the moment in which he stamped on, a rib was cracked, and this then caused a blood clot. Poor guy, he really got put through the ringer, but he's now a PR tool and something to be exploited. This is cemented by the man who's just beaten him up bowing and then thanking the crowd. The chaplain is the only one who stands up to it and says that he's had his choice removed. Again, he understands that goodness comes from within, and it's possible that Alex might also just be acting. I always try and watch as many other essayists as I can, because if there's something I can incorporate into a video, then I'm bloody gonna do it. I want to make these videos as good as I can, and this next guy is genuinely one of the best. That is Rob Ager, and he's made 2 videos questioning whether Alex was faking it. Again, I can't recap the entire thing, or we're gonna be here forever, but there are some little things that highlight Alex as a liar. At his home, which he goes to the next day, we can see him clenching his fist to the lodger. This shows that violence is still buried within him, and that in the end it hasn't been fully removed. Upon arriving at the house, you also get a clue behind the writer and can spot a very telling book. Rob said someone like Kubrick would probably look up whether the experiment would work, and he pointed out there's a book that would explain why it wouldn't. That is The Psychology of Learning by Edwin Ray Guthries, which is something Rob pointed out is in the bookcase behind him. In front of the writer, we also have the newspaper The Mirror, which is when we then pan over to the right. Rather than there being furniture there, we have David Prowse's bodybuilder, and he happens to be working out in front of a mirror. Alex also collapses in front of a mirror, and Rob believed these mirrors could highlight his inner conflict. He also sings Singing in the Rain, which is something he would associate with violence. Here he has a cloth acting like a mask on his face, and we can also see a sponge over his crotch. This is similar to the mask and groin pad he wore during his attacks, showcasing that it's still buried in him. Now this was thought up because McDowell came in wearing a cricket uniform for his costume fitting. They told him to leave out his jockstrap, and the cricket costume worked so well with it being white that in the end it helped to shape the design. Rob also pointed out the long nose on the mask, which may symbolise that Alex is a liar. Either way, if we take it at face value, his orange parcel symbolises subjugation. At this point he's kicked out by his parents, and it's difficult to not feel a bit sorry for our humble narrator. Staring out over the river, Rob pointed out the tide line rises throughout the scene as he seemingly is contemplating his end. It's a continuity error that could show he was actually stood there for hours and playing up the act until somebody noticed him.
Well, look, he's weeping now. But that's all his craft and artfulness.
This guy could have correctly guessed it's an act, and it's one big do time. You give it a watch if you want to see some further examples, and alongside his parents, he ends up crossing some of the people he's wronged. This includes the homeless man from the start, and he's jumped by his friends. The police then arrive and seem like they're going to save the day, but it's at this point we realise he's up shit's creek, literally. They take him to the countryside and then start to drown him, but in this scene there's a lot of interesting details. Now in the book, this was Dim and the leader of the rival gang Billy Boy. They kept it simpler for the film by having his ex-druid, so I do think both of them joining the police force, it works a lot better. Dim is also short for Dmitri, without having Russian allusions too. Leading him out, we also get a good look at their shoulders and can see their badge numbers are 667 and 665. Alex is in the middle, and this means his number's 666, further hinting to us the evilness that exists within him. He's almost like a Luciferian figure who's been cast out for breaking the rules and is now being punished. This includes a drowning, which according to the stories almost led to McDowell suffering the same fate himself. However, this has since been debunked, even though he's held underwater for an incredibly long take that lasts about 63 seconds. The water was also dyed with Bovril rather than having his head shoved in the mud. Alex is then left and he goes looking for a home, which brings things full circle from the start. Picked up by Prowse, you see just how big that the actor is, and he'd go on to play none other than Darth Vader. McGee here is also quite over the top, with his facial reactions being like some twisted kind of glee. He said he felt like it looked like he was taking a crap, but Kubrick apparently wanted him to come across that way. We then see him getting his meal with Prowse, carrying the writer down the stairs. According to IMDb trivia, he said to Kubrick that he's not exactly known as one-take Kubrick, and that he wanted to get the carrying shot done in as few takes as possible. Everyone on set was meant to be horrified, but Kubrick laughed and said he'd do his best. They filmed it in 6, which is probably the smallest amount ever, and even the final scene took 76 takes. Now the writer then feeds and drugs him, which I believe shows there's not too many differences in the side. Drugs are both used as a way to sedate and control Alex, and it allows them to use them for their own ends. Also, we get John Savident rolling in, who played Fred Elliott. He played Fred Elliott. Sadly passed away through... I'll tone things down, because he sadly passed away 3 days ago as of writing the script for this. And it was quite sad seeing this legendary actor pop up, but hey, I've got fond memories of him. Now, tortured by the music, we see that the writer finds ecstasy in this, showing that he too can gain pleasure from pain much like Alex. For Alex, it becomes too much and he ends up throwing himself out the window, which was shot with a custom-built camera. This was housed in a plastic box and then thrown off the building 6 times until it finally hit the ground pointing downwards. In the hospital, we see his newspapers chronicling controlling his free will was a mistake, and he's also visited by his parents. Tested once more, he does word association, where he often responds violently. This is known as the thematic apperception test, which focuses on someone's subconscious to tell aspects of their personality.
The boy you always quarrelled with is seriously ill?
My mind is a blank. And I'll smash your face for you, yar blockos.
Good.
He's then fed by nurses and treated just like a king. I took this as Kubrick commenting on how soft authority can be on crime, and leniency is often a staple of sentences. The minister then goes on to feed Alex, which was apparently improvised last minute by McDowell. He has everyone at his whim and is once more in a dominant position. We end with him giving a thumbs up, just like you on this video, and he's then blasted with classical music. People stand and take his picture, and he once more imagines sex and violence. Staring upwards in an almost orgasmic sense, it brings things full circle from that beginning. Then McDowell gave a toast to the camera, and Kubrick asked what it was he was doing. He said he wanted to toast the audience directly to let everyone know they were in for one hell of a ride. And what a hell of a ride it was, with this being a film that stood the test of time and still feels relevant. It was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars and was also one of the highest grossing films of the year. Sadly, the copycat crimes dogged the release, with Kubrick receiving threats for what he'd unleashed. He was blamed for gangs that formed in the US and UK and sought to get the film taken out of distribution. Warner Brothers managed to pull it in the UK, and Kubrick said to have never forgiven himself. He apparently would avoid it if it was brought up in conversation, with its release only seeing the light of day here after his death. He had an assistant destroy all the unused footage, and therefore will never get an extended cut. His wife explained that he was just mesmerized by the language in the book and didn't once think it would inspire any crimes. It's quite sad because it's such a good film, and the more you watch it, I think the more that you'll see in it. As for the future, well, we'll see if we ever get another one, and Burgess did begin to work on his second book. In his home during 2019, they found a manuscript, and this was titled A Clockwork Condition. However, this was never finished, though Burgess did create 200 pages of it. Maybe it's best to just be left alone and let the Druids and co just pop up in things like Space Jam Legacy. Yay! Still though, I think we can at least look back and see that Kubrick was more about condemning. The film is perfect satire, and it could even be chalked up to inspiring things like Black Mirror. There's lots of things that we can pull from this movie, and I hope you've enjoyed us going back through it. Obviously, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and huge thank you for all your support on these classic breakdowns. I know I do this every video, but we've also got a membership program that lets you get early access to these breakdowns, and just honestly, all the people who've signed up, it really means a lot to me. You get audio versions first, and then the edited ones when we've done them, and yeah, huge thank you to everyone who's signed up. That's just 99 pence and 99 cents a month, and it means that these videos can keep getting made. Now, if you want something else to watch, you've got a breakdown of The Mist, which will be linked on screen right now. We talk about the making of, the deeper meaning in it, and exactly what's going on with that unforgettable ending. Definitely go check it out right after this, and huge thank you for sitting through the video. With that out of the way, I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.